The first time I played The Last of Us Part 1, I cried. There's a reason the game is a near universal hit with both critics and audiences. Its story of loss and redemption is powerful and near flawless in its execution and presentation, especially in 2013. When I finished the game, I was deeply satisfied and left with enough open-ended questions to make it near impossible to not think about the implications for weeks, maybe months after. It was the delivery on the promise of what I believed games could be. I still think it's the best piece of zombie media ever made, better than any movie, book, or TV show ever. But 7 years later, and the internet is on fire. The second part released with one of the loudest disagreements about entertainment I've ever seen. One side claims it's a 10 out of 10, perfect game, while the other says it's a terribly written, poorly designed, overlong slog of gratuitous violence and meaningless despair that made them feel numb about what they had just played, or worse, angry towards the developers. Well, if you ask me, they're both wrong. In a coincidence that seems too perfect to not be the handiwork of some cruel mythical poet, it's a series that highlights the idea of us versus them that has created one of the biggest divides in video game history. Why do we feel the need to attack the idea of them so vocally over a video game? This video aims to be a comprehensive review. I've written this for everyone. If you love the game and want to relive its high points, if you hate it and want a deeper understanding as to maybe why, or if you don't ever plan on playing it and want to know what the discussion is all about. I've divided the video into 3 sections: non-spoiler, mild spoiler, and heavy spoilers. If you plan on actually playing the game, I would recommend you stop this video before watching both of the later parts, but the choice is yours. Honestly, I don't expect this video to change your mind about the game. I think we're too used to seeking out the comfort of our familiar echo chambers and doubling down on our first impressions for some schmuck like me to occupy any meaningful or influential real estate in your mind. But I hope to open up some kind of barrier and create healthier discussion around what I consider to be the most toxic video game release of all time. The Last of Us Part 2 is one of the most challenging stories I've ever played. It took me on a roller coaster through twists and turns, some of which thrilled me and others which made me want to put a controller down for good. I think in order to be as objective as possible, I need to put any possible bias I may have out there for you to know. I loved the first Last of Us. It was easily my game of the year upon its release. I've also enjoyed every Uncharted game, with 2 and 4 being particular standouts. Overall, I consider myself a fan of what Naughty Dog has created. For this game, I paid for my own digital copy, although Naughty Dog did send a press box to the Linus Media Group office, which I unboxed very excitedly in this video. But at the time of filming, I'd already played about 90% of the game, so I'd like to think that my privileged experience didn't influence my opinion in any meaningful way. I'm making this video on my own time, unpaid and after hours, because I'm tired of the work that hundreds of people have passionately created over many years being reduced to snarky copy pastas. I get it. It's a golf simulator. When I read those comments, some kind of deep and fiery passion becomes apparent, which is amazing. I don't want to partake in a hobby where everyone's just lukewarm. Unfortunately, my gut tells me that a lot of the people saying these negative things online probably haven't even played the game. To the people that have played it and want to share their negative experience, power to you. I think it's 100% valid to not have enjoyed this game. Beyond my instinct, the facts suggest that a lot of negativity comes from people who haven't finished any meaningful portion of the game. A couple of hours after its release, the game had more than double the reviews Part 1 had accumulated in over 7 years. And after 1 day on the market, the game had garnered over 30,000 user ratings and currently sits at over 96,000 user reviews, which is 8 times 2018's God of War and almost 20 times the Final Fantasy VII Remake. And both games have sold nearly as well as this game. This journey took me, and most reviewers, close to 30 hours to complete. So either these people haven't completed a meaningful portion of the game at the time of their review, or they have some other reason to review bomb the game. We live in a world where tension is extremely high. I think those tensions have exacerbated what would probably still have been a divisive launch. But let's keep this in mind. This is a zombie video game, and it's never worth adding hate into a world that has too much of it already. If you take one thing away from this video, just remember to be kind to one another. Or, as these great philosophers once said,
be excellent to each other.
The saga of this game's release reminds me a bit of Season 8 of Game of Thrones in a few ways. For both, after leaks revealed details that fans were upset about, they started to turn. The creators were taking beloved characters that fans had learned to love deeply and felt a fierce loyalty towards, and they were being cursed to tragedy, an ending that fans, myself included, didn't feel like those cherished characters deserved. For Game of Thrones, it became clear episode by episode that the writers had left behind the careful craft that made the first season so incredible and the subversion of expectations so believable. But I don't think time will doom The Last of Us Part 2 to the same widespread opinion that has mostly erased Game of Thrones from pop culture conversation. Not that this game is faultless in any way. Let's work through the more objective stuff, the stuff that even if you hate the game, I think we can mostly agree on. This game is one of the most expensive feeling experiences I've ever played. It's 30 hours long, and in every single minute, you can sense the sheer amount of blood, sweat, and tears from the staff members at Naughty Dog. Some of this work is allegedly unfairly and wrongly demanded by the studio. If you don't know, Naughty Dog is a first-party studio, which means that they have a generally long leash and a huge budget, as this generation of sometimes excellent, and sometimes less well-received, but always uber-polished games have proven. Unsurprisingly, this is no exception. The Last of Us Part 2 is a veritable polished-to-a-sheen sight to behold. Whether you're clearing a hill as the setting sun casts its warm rays on the yellowed grass, or sneaking your way through the brush in your rain-soaked clothes, this game never lets up on spectacle. The world feels real, and only in a few moments where an animation breaks was my immersion weakened. Never as bad as the first game, though. The performance capture is absolutely industry-leading, and the ability to communicate intent through non-verbal expression is second to none. This is one of the best technical showcases on a console game, period. Okay, maybe with a few caveats. On PS4 Pro, the game runs at 1440p at a mostly locked 30 FPS, only noticeably dipping a few times when there's lots of water or sometimes when I activated my listening mode. On the original PS4, it runs at 1080p 30 FPS and is apparently more stable than the Pro version, but I can't personally verify this. I really wish there was a 1080p 60 FPS toggle for the PS4 Pro, similar to God of War's performance mode, as I found myself missing headshots that I think I would have landed at 60 FPS. I am beyond excited for the remaster, or update, or whatever we will inevitably get on the PS5 and maybe the PC? If you've played Uncharted 4, you'll undoubtedly recognize some of the impressive technology used. The big ocean waves tossing a small boat, the volumetric light beaming beautifully through the canopy of a dense forest, realistic snow deformation through tessellation, and even some new tech, like the dense grass that not only looks good, but seamlessly integrates into the gameplay. As in most stealth games these days, you can hide in the grass, but the way in which the wind blows through this grass is something to behold. Naughty Dog uses a world-class, perhaps the best bar none, temporal anti-aliasing solution that helps the game look sharp, even upsampled to 4K. This helps preserve the impressive details of the ultra-realistic environments and the stellar character models. They use depth of field well and just enough, it's never distracting. Having the world go slightly out of focus when you grab an enemy, a dirty lens that scatters anamorphic lens flares, just the right amount of simulated handheld shake and a subtle film grain filter are nice subtle touches that really help to sell the cinematic illusion. There are a few things that aren't perfect, especially when you compare it to the original trailers. Fire effects are fine, but are less impressive than even in the first game in some ways. Shadows and volumetric lighting has been simplified, reduced, or removed from what was originally shown. Animations have also been simplified in the end product. This really didn't bother me though, as early gameplay trailers are often just a vision of what the developers are aiming for, and the overall impression of the final game is second to none. One thing in particular that I noticed is how much more real the lighting feels when compared to previous Naughty Dog games. The natural look of this game is stunning, with most light sources either being an overcast sky or light pouring in from a broken window. The color temperature of this game is generally neutral to cold, so when there's a warm light source, which often will punctuate an important moment in the game, these are powerful and effective. Beyond this, the more natural lighting extends to the characters themselves, and compared to the previous game, they actually look like they belong in a level, lit by the same lights as the environment. But it's not just the improved lighting that helps draw you into the brutal reality of these characters, but the incredible audio design. From the sounds of the infected, which give you a real sense that the humans underneath the infection are still conscious and suffering. The deeply layered sounds of the environment, and the powerfully simple score. This is an incredible sounding game. Oh, and I love the audio options. This may be a staple of Naughty Dog games, but the ability to customize speaker placement is great for tweaking the audio experience to be perfectly engrossing. On the subject of tweaking, this game has deservedly gotten a lot of praise for its accessibility options. They're divided into 3 sections for support for the vision, hearing, and mobility impaired, with dozens of individual toggles each. Apparently, this game is designed in such a way that a completely blind or deaf person could actually make it through its entirety with the help of these settings. That blows my mind. It's pretty undisputable that The Last of Us Part 2 is an astonishing swan song to the 8th generation of consoles. It really pushes the aging technology past what I thought was possible. But all these technical details do not make a game good. Now, time to get into the more contentious topics. First off, gameplay. The gameplay in Part 2 is very similar to the previous entry, but it's been deeply refined in small but meaningful ways. While Part 1 was fine for its time, when I replayed it before starting this game, I was shocked at how stiff, restrictive, and simple it felt compared to the games I've played since, like Metal Gear Solid 5 or the last 2 Hitman games. It wasn't that much fun to sneak around, and it was way worse to shoot your way out of trouble. And while this game is no MGS5, it's actually not as far off as I expected. Like most stealth games, the interplay between the 2 pillars of stealth and combat comprise the foundation of the gameplay, with scarcity of weapon ammunition and crafting supplies often being the deciding factor between the two. And when you consider that those foundations are split between killing the infected and other humans, there starts to be what I'd call a satisfactory amount of variety in the encounters. Luckily, the level design adds some spice into how you can face and encounter those enemies, but more on that later. With the added prone mode that you should absolutely upgrade as soon as possible, just do it, trust me, the hiding in the different lengths of grass mechanic, as well as the improved AI compared to the first game, I felt much more like a sneaky Rambo, carefully sussing out my encounters, running when things weren't going my way, and scanning to see how I could best utilize the environment and other enemies against each other. The animation really helps to serve that feeling as well. Whether you're diving into the grass after a silent bow shot or doing a real witty aerial takedown, I was constantly feeling like a badass. There are a few moments of naturally emergent gameplay too, and those really stuck with me. The first time I grabbed a stunned human and threw him into a clicker that was wildly swinging, and then used that time to run away, I was blown away. After having played the first 5 or 6 hours on the moderate setting, as I wanted to get through the story quickly and avoid the Twitter spoilers, I decided to hop into the granular difficulty settings and customize it to my liking. I would highly recommend doing this to perfectly match how you want to interact with the game. I won't be giving the game bonus points for including these, as the game should be balanced for fun by default, but I found the gameplay experience much improved with these settings. Just like accessibility, it's just a really great inclusion that costs time and money that I hope more AAA developers spend moving forward. Once I had the game set just how I liked it, the gameplay loop became much more rewarding. Part of that is the improved responsiveness. In this game, the result of pushing the left or right stick feels much tighter. You aren't fighting the animation's extra unskippable frames like in Uncharted 3 or Part 1, which prevented me from getting my shots off or snapping to the right cover. While Naughty Dogs have never had great shooting, this game might be their best iteration of the mechanic yet, with every bullet feeling meaningful. I can't give all the credit to the improved combat for the fun I did have, as the much better level design carries a lot of that weight. Compared to the previous game, where levels were mostly tunnels with 1 or 2 pathways and maybe a couple branches to pick up some supplies, The Last of Us 2 opens up its world in a huge way, and this leads to many interesting choices. Do I smash these windows, keeping me safe from those clickers for some potential supplies? Or do I crawl into the wreckage of the next building and take my chances there? Or do I bypass both and just continue on my merry way? Most of these optional buildings tell some kind of environmental story, which made the numerous optional sidetracks never feel tedious or tiresome. The beginning of this game features a bit of an actual open world, which you could absolutely run through to get what you need, but I found myself slowing down, searching each building, each story, reliving the events that had unfolded there and collecting the supplies that would help me survive later. There are still restrictive stealth arenas that force your playstyle, unless you're willing to wait some ungodly amount of time to see the full patrol patterns, maybe. These moments of gameplay boil down to isolating guards one at a time until the game tells you the coast is clear, and this can definitely get a little tedious by the end of the game. When I play stealth games, the most rewarding feeling is a successful ghost playthrough. Not killing anyone after changing clothes in Hitman, or doing the extra work to doom a target to a fate worse than death in Dishonored are still such a rush. Never being seen and thus never needing to take down a single guard triggers such a deep level of chemical reward in my brain, and that switch was seldom triggered playing this game. You will often need to isolate, eliminate, repeat. Okay, from here on out, I'm giving you a minor spoiler warning. This means there will be some stuff that I don't deem crucial to your enjoyment or emotional impact of the game. But if you're trying to stay totally non-spoilered, I recommend you turn the video off now. Early on in this game, before the tutorial is even finished, you get control of a new character called Abby. Although you don't know where she came from, she will be a playable character later in the game for a large part of the runtime, and I will definitely talk more about her later. Without getting too far into it, I think the game does a pretty good job differentiating her playstyle from Ellie. Abby will fall into a brute trope, as she's built like a brick house, which is super cool. My girlfriend, who is a more muscular woman, was super pumped that a video game character looks more like her than all the unrealistic representation the genre usually gets. Where Ellie is wiry and quick, Abby is heavy and weighty. Even their upgrade paths are different and lightly accentuate their core differences. When I was Ellie, I upgraded that prone speed right away and was rushing sneakily on my stomach most places, but Abby, who needs to get much further on her upgrade path before she can do this, forced me into using this style much less, which helps sell me on her heavy muscularity. Beyond this, their animations are very different, and because Ellie is equipped with her knife from the first game, Ellie's all stabby, stabby, and Abby's all smashy, smashy. The thing is with Ellie's knife is that it kinda ruins some of the zombie gameplay for me. In the first game, when you heard the guttural, unnatural noise of those clickers, you knew you had to stop immediately and change your plan or face instant death. In part 2, they've been demoted to the easiest enemy bar none. Later in the first game, sure, you can craft shifts to kill the clickers, but before then, you're helpless to being torn apart instantly if they catch you, which makes those stealth segments including them tense and terrifying. Ellie's knife is basically an unlimited shiv, and being able to take care of clickers has no cost beyond one button press. They can't see you, only hear you, so you can go anywhere, do anything, as long as you do it slowly. To compensate, the game replaces the threat of the clickers with two mostly new infected, the Stalkers, who were in the previous game but pretty rarely, and Shamblers. Shamblers are basically a big spore bomb slowly walking towards you. Get too close, they explode. You take damage, get stunned. Pretty standard video game stuff. They're tough to take down, but like in a bullet spongy kind of way. Gunfights against them felt really unsatisfying and frustrating. But the Stalkers were even worse. It feels like there's nothing I could do to stop them from grabbing me. Though it is good design to have an enemy bypass your listening mode powers, as it forces you to be more careful and not fully rely on a single mechanic, I mostly found this enemy type would just appear and jump scare me. This design tactic definitely lost its effectiveness the more it happened. Oh look, a wall with a person sticking out. I wonder if something will pop. Oh god, oh no! Other than that, there's still bloaters that occupy the mini-boss position and runners that fill the most common appearances of the infected. There's one more type of infected, but I'm going to save that for later. Speaking of spoilers, in order to properly analyze the story of the second part, I think it's important to go over the first game, what worked and what didn't. The Last of Us Part 1 is a powerful redemption story within the context of a fairly nuanced zombie apocalypse. If you ask me, the reason it stands out is its absolutely stellar beginning and end. That's not to say that the middle is weak. It's filled with well-developed characters, interesting turns, and moving emotional climaxes interspersed throughout. But in my opinion, there's nothing in the middle of that game that hasn't been accomplished just as well in other zombie or post-apocalypse media. This game is universally praised because when it's boiled down to its core, it's a super simple story done extremely well that has broad appeal because of its universal nature. A man who, after losing his daughter, in my opinion still the gosh darn best opening 20 minutes of a video game, turns into a hardened, selfish survivor and will learn to love again through a cross-country journey with a surrogate daughter, Ellie. What makes Ellie special, besides excellent writing and a flawless performance, is that she was bitten weeks ago and hasn't turned into a monster. And in a world where once you're bitten you have hours to get your affairs in order, that means that she may be the basis for a cure. Pretty great setup, but having your active plot, the A-plot, be a quest to find a cure or a vaccine for the zombie apocalypse isn't what makes the story special. In many of these stories, the character with the redemption arc, in this case Joel, will be faced with a sacrifice they need to make, which cements in their eyes, and in the hearts of the audience, that they have completed their arc and become a better person. The twist at the end of The Last of Us, and why I think this game's story is particularly special, is that Joel's redemption arc turns into something else. The heroic sacrifice the story demands doesn't fall on him. Sure, he makes the choice, but it's not he who will die, it's Ellie. After he's informed by the leader of the Fireflies that Ellie will be killed in order to extract a cure, he goes on a rescue rampage to break Ellie out, murdering their way out, beginning with a doctor who is going to perform the operation. Remember him.
No!
In this moment, Joel makes the decision that solidifies and completes his arc, but dooms humanity to continue in its slow demise. He's learned to open his heart and love again, as he's unable to let a second daughter die, even when the fate of the world is at stake. That means that he must directly kill mostly innocent people that are doing what they're doing for the greater good, and indirectly doom millions, maybe billions of others. This subversion of our expectation is brilliant in so many ways, while still giving the audience a powerful emotional payoff and a violent and difficult encounter for final gameplay climax. It's not what we expect while remaining fully believable. This decision has unity with the growth that we've seen Joel make. The cherry on top is the final exchange he and Ellie share after her rescue.
No matter what, you keep finding something to fight for. Now, I know that's not what you want to hear right now.
Swear to me. Swear to me that everything that you said about the Fireflies is true.
I swear.
Okay.
That cut to black is perfect, as it leaves the audience with open-ended questions that you immediately feel the need to talk and think about. Does she know that Joel is lying? Will she find out? What will the Fireflies do now? Is humanity doomed forever? It reminds me of some of the best last moments in movies, because those questions those final frames pose are potent, unanswerable. Your imagination is so skilled at filling in the blanks with every possibility. In some ways, by killing so many innocents, lying to Ellie and dooming humankind, Joel has become the villain. However, from his perspective, a perspective that the player has shared for the last 15 hours, it was the only choice he, but more importantly, you, could make. Ellie and him were the last of us, in the sense that they were the last two of Joel's tribe. The game isn't called The Last Humans for a reason. It was an ending I never really wanted to see explained any further, but just like after Andy handed Woody off in pals to Bonnie, and the series had its perfect close, the creators, after so many years, somehow felt the need to not let sleeping dogs lie. This time, they awakened some kind of beast. The Last of Us Part 2 begins 5 years after the finale of the first game, where Joel and Ellie have settled into a village in Jackson. This place is about as nice as you could want in the zombie apocalypse. Huge walls protect its perimeter and citizens, there is order and law, and its occupants feel free enough to even have a town dance. It's at one of these dances, Ellie and Dina will have their first kiss. At first, this night of the dance is pieced together by the audience from the interactions the characters have while the game is teaching you the basics. But almost immediately, you get the impression that Joel and Ellie are not really on great terms. Did she find out about Joel's lie? Did something else happen to make their seemingly unbreakable bond shaky? Before you can get too comfortable though, you're controlling Abby, the brick house I was talking about earlier. Someone from her group, a man named Owen, wants to show her the town, and it becomes clear that they're looking for someone. At this point, you're being groomed to see Abby as the villain. After finding out that Owen's partner Mel is pregnant, with the subtext being that Abby and Owen have some kind of romantic past, Abby will break away from Owen. Her desperation to reach her target becomes more and more clear as she presses on through the freezing, howling wind. Her frantic escape from a growing horde of infected leads her upon the path of Joel and Tommy, who will save her. But the group can't stay there. It's too dangerous, and Abby invites the brothers to take shelter in the mansion her team has secured. The next morning, we find out that Joel and Tommy haven't checked in from their patrol. Ellie goes in search of them. Arriving at the mansion, things go from bad to worse, as Abby blasts Joel in the leg. This group is a remnant of the Fireflies from the first game. They have traveled all this way to get their due for what was a vile act demanding strong and violent revenge, from their perspective at least. Abby picks up a golf club. That damn golf club. Abby begins beating on Joel, wanting to relish the vengeance she's been fantasizing for the last 5 years. Ellie will be forced to watch after a failed rescue attempt. Beaten to the floor, she sees the bloody Joel. She screams, she cries, she begs, all in an attempt to get them to stop. As the final fatal blow comes down, a helpless Ellie transforms her desperation into pure rage. A fury comes up within her. And as Owen talks everyone else down from killing her and Tommy, a hate-filled fire catches within her soul as she promises she will kill every single fucking person in that room. This is the driving force of the game, the emotion behind every decision, every action the characters take. Hate, anger, revenge. We're in it now. The Last of Us Part 2. The fact that this game kills Joel is one of the most controversial topics on the internet as I write this. In my mind, behind every golf simulator joke is someone who is upset that the game kills such a beloved character as its inciting incident. They think that Joel is undeserving of such a fate and that Naughty Dog played a cheap trick on the audience for gimmicky emotional manipulation. While I certainly was upset that Joel was dead, there's no way he didn't deserve to be killed. To be clear, I don't believe an eye for an eye is good morality in real life, but it certainly makes sense in the context of writing a story, and this group is getting one eye for millions of others. This isn't to say that Joel is a bad person necessarily, but he absolutely did bad things that necessitate consequences in good storytelling. In the context of this world of violence, survival, and hate, the murder of Joel and the subsequent revenge quest Ellie goes on makes a lot of sense to me. The characters seem properly motivated, and the logic of why they are doing what they're doing mostly makes sense. I have a few questions as to why Dina would risk her life for Joel's revenge, and why Jesse would later risk everything to join them, but I think in a world where death could be around every corner, relationships are high stakes. Meaningful bonds may be quickly established, but this game's overall pacing seems kinda slow. Not necessarily in a bad way, think like Blade Runner 2049 or Thin Red Line. When I replayed Part 1, I was surprised at how quickly all the vignettes came and went. What I remember being a multi-hour story was in reality just a short vignette and told a complete and closed story at a surprisingly brisk pace. These many episodes, combined with the numerous set-piece moments, meant that I never had enough time to get bored. In Part 2, seemingly more confident in their storytelling and core gameplay loop, Naughty Dog has mostly foregone this vignette formula for 4 3 to 10 hour chunks with many fewer set-piece moments that make the game feel less like a season of a TV show. Some people love it, some people hate it. I think it mostly works. The whole second part of the game, played from Ellie's perspective, where one by one she tracks down the people who were complicit to Joel's murder, works for me. I was angry, and I only knew these people for their vicious act, even though it may have been justifiable. I wanted them dead, and even though deep down I wanted Ellie to learn to forgive, I understood why she couldn't. As you find each of these people, you get a scene with them. It's always us versus them, and you're here to kill. You eventually find a place of rest, an old theater, and Dina admits that she's pregnant with Jesse's baby. She's known for weeks. Over the next 2 days, you continue the quest mostly alone, where you learn that the WLF, Abby's group, are in conflict with the Seraphites, a religious cult. I like this dynamic of two factions fighting totally outside of you, as it helps flesh out the stark reality of this world. I did find the Seraphites' derogatorily cult scars just a little underdeveloped. Apparently in one draft of the game, there's a long gameplay and story segment on their island that was described as transversing the 7 circles of hell, and I felt that absence of details that sequence would have provided the Seraphites. But at this point in the game, your intent is still focused and clear: vengeance. The other characters you are with never deeply question your motivation, and it helps maintain that this is the right, if not the only thing to do. This hate-filled second part of the game climaxes on the 3rd day when you reach the aquarium and kill Owen, the one WLF who seemed a little sympathetic, and his partner Mel, who in a post-mortem reveal is shown to be pregnant. Back at the theater, as you're unpacking the events of the previous 3 days, a gunshot, Ellie looks up shocked. It's the brute monster Abby. She's got murder in her eyes. And then, the screen cuts to black. We're playing a flashback as young Abby. Her father, a charming, kind man with whom she has a sweet relationship, was the doctor Joel killed at the end of the last game. That's why she's angry. Joel not only took away the hope for humanity and destroyed us, the Fireflies, he murdered her father. Her revenge wasn't cold, it was personal. And that works for me. Expecting the game to cut back to the theater right away, I was shocked to have the screen cut to black with the title card, Seattle Day 1, appear. Shit. I'm about to play back the last 3 days from Abby's perspective. Cutting away from a tense moment to leave the audience hanging is okay, as many movies do it in their first scenes. It leaves you with questions the audience can use to contextualize the story they're consuming. But because this is a 30-hour video game, when the game takes the intensity from 100 back to 0 and is about to spend the next 8 hours or so catching us up to the present, back to what the put-on-pause level intensity is, it's deeply frustrating. It kills the pacing in a significant way. For me, it diminished the emotional investment I had in the game at that point, and that's a pretty big deal. Okay, so we're playing as Abby, a violent monster who has killed a character I love, and we're kind of tracing Ellie's steps while she was in Seattle. To be honest, I was expecting something more akin to a Resident Evil game where there are many important crossover moments where the characters would interact, even if indirectly. However, this game does something different as you mostly interact with Abby's friends knowing full well, as the player, that they will be killed after your moments with them. Ellie's revenge now begins to feel small and meaningless as Abby, the actual intended victim of Ellie's quest, will live out an entirely separate experience over those 3 days. Except for Manny. Oh no! As you get to know these fully realized people, I started to internalize the complex morality of the world these characters inhabit. Who was once a cold-blooded murderer becomes a funny and charming ladies' man who is kind and loving to his father, who once told you Joel got exactly what he deserved, is willing to put herself on the line and risk her place in society for Abby. With the additional context that I'd killed them earlier, I found these story beats incredibly effective. I've seen people criticize that these parts of the game were unnecessary because, as a human, we should have empathy for all people regardless of knowing them or not. If we were a good person, we could imagine for ourselves these characters day to day. We should come up with the backstory needed to feel the needed empathy the story demands. We don't need these sequences. To that, I say this, sir. When you tell a story, what you don't show or tell does not exist. And to have empathy for a video game NPC, essentially a series of zeros and ones, is not an agreed upon human value. In real life, we've learned to contort and vilify the actions of others in order to fit the worldview we already have. Have you been on Twitter? To have empathy for people we aren't given reasons to care for just isn't natural human behavior. Beyond this, I wanted to talk a little bit about the idea of revelation. In theological terms, I've heard revelation described as when knowledge drops from your brain to your heart. An idea or thought for which you had a logical basis becomes something you can feel internalized in your emotions. That's when it becomes actually true to you. I think the way this game forces you to see the other side of the conflict, to sit with Abby on her quest to redemption, gave me the revelation regarding the consequences of Ellie's quest. Because of this, as you are given the broader context and personal impact of this murder spree, your actions become harder and harder to cope with. You begin to see Abby's side of the story, and what was once a tough as nails, no apology bitch gains dimension. Although some people seem to think that Abby's characterization is a little overly simplistic, I think that there's more nuanced growth happening. Those pet the dog moments are accompanied with more realistic portrayals of her growth through big moments, but more importantly, the small, offhand discussions. And even Vito Corleone pets a cat sometimes. For this more nuanced approach, there are two sets of relationship that I think best draw out this depth from Abby. The first is with siblings Lev and Yara, two young scars who you come across when you've been captured, hung, and will seemingly be tortured. The second is with your ex Owen and the mother of his future child, Mel. Owen is written to reveal Abby's positive side to the player, while Yara and Lev are the moral rocks by which Abby anchors her change. I want to touch on the former first, as we already know his ultimate fate. Owen is the first WLF member that is presented as sympathetic. He's reluctant to torture Joel, and he's the reason why Ellie and Tommy survive the encounter. Through a series of flashbacks similar to the ones we got with Ellie and Joel, we get to experience what the best times between him and Abby were, and tragically, you get the sense that they still loved each other, and that Mel was a complication that Owen was now duty-bound to take care of. He's a kind man, and one of the few people choosing to seek light in the world, which is an important theme of this game. He's chosen to see hope where others see none, and he's gotten tired of the costly us versus them mentality. These flashbacks of their relationship were some excellent nuanced storytelling, as they were executed with such tenderness and warmth that contrasted the cold, hateful world we had inhabited up to that point. For a minute, let's go deeper into that idea of tenderness. One of Ellie's flashbacks is a memory of Joel taking her to a science museum where there's no real threat, no challenging gameplay, just a story to tell. As we navigate the halls, we pass dinosaurs and eventually land in the exhibit dedicated to space exploration. Last game, and earlier in this game, we found out Ellie dreamed of being an astronaut, so just the fact that Joel brought her here means the world to her and the player. But then there's a space capsule, and the pair enter. Joel hands her a cassette. It's the audio from real astronauts taking off. The camera drifts into a close-up, and as the sound of the boosters fire, the lighting changes to show that she's entered the astronaut's experience. Ellie's closed eyes have opened up her imagination. She's taking off. The tape ends with a soft click, and we're transported back to reality. A loving father figure watching over us with a satisfied, warm smile. This game does similar visual motif things with Abby and Owen's relationship, as he's set up his home base in an aquarium. Through many flashbacks, you explore the many different wings of the aquarium with some of the same feelings Ellie's time with Joel evoked in me. These people, and I mean fully realized people, are not just tools to tell some manipulative story. Every time I went back in time with Abby, I felt like I knew and understood her just a little bit better. The other relationship that defines my perception of Abby is Yara and Lev. Their relationship begins out of necessity. They need each other to escape the scars who have smashed Yara's arm with a hammer, and subsequently hordes of infected. But after leaving the pair behind and reaching a surprisingly alive Owen, a nightmare sequence, which is a slight variation on one we've seen and will see again later, compels Abby to go after them. She manages to rescue the pair and bring them back to Mel, who's a surgeon and medic trained under Abby's father. Given a list of supplies Mel will need to amputate Yara's arm and save her life, Abby heads off to the hospital with Lev, where we've already once murderously visited as Ellie, to find that we're actually ahead of her in the story again. With the help of Noro, our friend, we escape capture from the WLF as Abby's gone AWOL, to find that the supplies that we need will be in the underground, where even the wolves are too afraid to go and clear out, where the whole infection began in Seattle. Things are about to get real ugly. The underground part of this game is the purest horror the series has ever seen, and it worked really well for me. The infection began here, and has been mostly left untouched for 15 years. Equipped with only your flashlight to barely illuminate the overgrowth of spores, we get a sense of what the first hours of the outbreak were like with some clever environmental storytelling, with one note being my particular favorite. A patient was complaining about being locked up and left alone away from his family, saying that wasn't fair. I was tense and yet riveted, and when I finally found the supplies, I was deeply relieved. But it's not over. As this is the longest infected and untouched place in Seattle, something dark stalks its garage. In the ambulance where you find the surgical kit, some super zombie, like a rat king of infected people and spore growth, busts in. You can't fight this thing. You can only run. This is awesome. Until the boss fight part sets in, and the terror you feel is transformed into a boring pattern where you wait for the monster to charge, dodge, then shoot your clip. Again. And again. And again. This sequence, from a gameplay perspective, is the weakest of the whole game, if you ask me. It devolves into running into circles over and over. The Rat King will split off a super clicker, and the task at hand will become a little more challenging, but it's never as satisfying as I would want it to be. After you take care of the Rat King, you're back at the aquarium, and Mel manages to save Yara. After Yara's supernaturally quick recovery, she asks you to help her find her brother. You find out that Lev is trans and that he was fated to be the wife of one of the Scar elders, but after a fight between the two siblings, Lev shaved their head to resemble the village warriors. In their religious society, defying tradition and gender roles is the death sentence. Unfortunately, their mother will be punished for Lev's actions, so he takes it upon himself to go to Scar Island and rescue her. The Scar Island is what best demonstrates the dichotomy of my feelings towards this game. It's overly long and drawn out, and after many hours spent catching up to the climax of Ellie's story, I'm exhausted. There are many restrictive stealth arenas that aren't fun to get through, and at this point, I was desperate to see the end of the story. However, once the wolves begin their attack, and we're faced with the real consequences of Abby's defection, things take a turn for the exciting. Abby comes across a group, led by the wolf leader Isaac, on the hunt for scars. And while I can't tell it better than the game does, so I'll just play this clip.
Yara! Yara, get up! Yara, please!
We need to move.
Come on! I can't leave her here! Stay back! Drop it! Now!
Oh, shit.
It's Abby! Stay back!
Stand down.
Isaac.
What the hell are you doing?
I need you to hear me out.
What's that behind you?
He saved my life.
Move out of the way. We'll deal with you back home.
He's not one of them, please.
Abby, move.
God damn it, he's just a kid!
You have 3 seconds to get away from that scar. 1,
You really gonna shoot me?
2.
I'm not fucking moving. No!
What the fuck?
Lev, we need to move. She's gone. Oh my god, she's gone. Lev, come on. Those were your fucking people. Hey, you're my people. Listen to me.
This moment, I knew I loved Abby. You are my people. You are us, the person I've made this journey with, I've sacrificed for, and now you're all I got. Us is all I have. This is one of my favorite gameplay moments of the game too, where the scars and WLF are busy fighting and you somehow need to get through. You can choose to engage in these battles, or you can just sneak by undetected. It's Hideo Kojima's wettest and wildest dream of stealth on the battlefield from Metal Gear Solid 4, and it's absolutely fantastic. Your improvised plan is to escape on a boat that's on the other side of the town that is currently burning, and in an epic horseback sequence, you get to see the culmination of hatred, violence, and revenge. Everything is on fire, and people are being savagely killed all around you. It's a technically stunning showcase, but also an incredibly powerful moment in the story. I'm no longer on board with what the price of us versus them can cost. The denouement of this part of the game returns us to the aquarium, where Ellie's revenge has finally taken the life of Owen and Mel. Abby and Lev go after her. And we're back. We made it. After another game's worth of story, we're back at Ellie's climax, and this confrontation has an entirely new meaning. You don't want Ellie to die, but cast in this new light, I found myself unsure of what to feel or who to cheer for. In a pretty cool boss fight where Abby's unarmed, you get to see what it's like to go against a fully kitted Ellie. The player, at least in my personal experience, is forced to play a sequence where they need to question their allegiances, and again, we are given new context to the violence and rage we have been experiencing for 20 hours. This boss fight really works for me, because on an emotional level, I was totally on board with Abby, but deep down I still loved Ellie. I've never in my life played anything like this. I'm still blown away. As Abby, you eventually overpower Ellie, and when Dina comes to save her, you get the chance to enact an eye for an eye revenge for the murder of a pregnant woman. Thankfully, Lev talks you down, and the two of you leave. Holy fuck. Like, wow. The monster you once hated because you beat Joel to death with a goddamn golf club is the person I was most on board with. She had gone from tropish brute to complex multi-layered woman who learned to quell her rage, take the path of peace, and walk away. I was there. Naughty Dog had taken me on a journey from light to dark, then dark to light. I'd been challenged as a player and as an evaluator of stories. Some people say that they don't get why Abby would leave Ellie, an active threat to her life, but I didn't feel that way. My motivation as an individual matched up to the actions that were being acted out on screen, and the characters were playing out the emotions I felt in real time. For a moment, I was at the peak of video game storytelling nirvana. An incredible narrative told in a unique and novel way, and a complete turnaround from where I felt the game was going in the beginning. As a film critic, I've watched over 1,000 movies and consumed countless novels, and I'm always seeking something I haven't seen before. My favorite video game stories are the ones that can't be replicated somewhere in another medium. Games like Bioshock, where the player's agency affects the meaning and impact of the story, or Florence, where in order to proceed, you need to give up on a puzzle, which means that, as a player, you're giving up on the relationship. These stories are what push the medium forward into its bright future. Games that are just long movies with player-controlled action are fine, but they don't achieve this level of storytelling. By pitting two characters that the player has controlled for long periods, it's totally unique stakes for a conflict that can't be replicated anywhere else. And I love it. Unfortunately, the game isn't over. And this is where I struggled the most. We're returned to a farmhouse where Dina and Ellie have settled into a seemingly happy existence with their baby, and in the best Naughty Dog fashion, we get some of the sweet moments of tenderness. However, after Tommy comes over and tells Ellie that he has a lead on Abby's location in Santa Barbara, and after a PTSD flashback episode about Joel, in the middle of the night, Ellie packs her things. After a discussion with Dina where the consequences of this choice become clear, she leaves everything behind to finally finish the path of vengeance she began so long ago. Yeah, this was frustrating. Girl, you got your revenge. You killed like 7/8 of them. Abby let you live again. I don't want Allie to go in this finale, and I found it hard to believe she would throw herself into the frying pan once again. This is when what the character I'm controlling is forcing me to do something I no longer want to do. And not in this is difficult to do but must be done kind of way. More like, really? You're gonna make me fucking ruin Ellie's life? Ugh. And when you look at this post-mortem interview IndieWire did with game director Neil Druckmann and Haley Gross, it seems that the confused emotion the player feels stems from confusion in the writing team. Both of these creators give radically different responses as to why Ellie does what she does. This disconnect between the writers and the characters, and then subsequently the characters and the player, is the start of what I consider to be the biggest sin this game commits. Cut to Santa Barbara, and Abby, still with Lev, is looking to find the rumored new gathering of the Fireflies. After being ambushed by some kind of hunters and captured, we cut to Ellie on their trail. After some basic gameplay encounters that weren't particularly fun and didn't feel like an endgame escalation, we get trapped by the same people that captured Abby. Thankfully, due to some quick thinking and her immunity to zombies, she kills her captors after finding out that they have Abby locked up. This group of hunters isn't super fleshed out, and I don't think that's the point. This violent, savage tribalism will always be the default when society falls. Ellie breaks into their compound and it becomes clear that these hunters are bad folk who enslave their captives and turn those who try to escape into infected. As a small note, in one of the funnest single random things in the game, you can let loose these turned slaves on their captors. It's useful for a distraction, but it also feels cathartic in a way that makes me want to call my therapist. After breaking out some of the prisoners, we are told that Abby is in the punishment area for trying to escape. As the escaped prisoners wage war for their freedom, we approach our target. Once a proud model of female physical strength is a malnourished, sunken-eyed husk hung up by her wrists. She's dying. You cut her down, and as soon as she knows that you're not going to kill her there and then, she cuts down the person across from her, Lev. All three of you walk towards the water where a few boats wait. And this is it. The single most frustrating, poorly thought out, and simply stupid idea in this game. Give me a second. As you can tell, I think this game is mostly brilliant. It's a unique storytelling structure that has mostly worked, and when the payoffs happen, they blow me away. No movie, no TV show, no book. Nothing can do what this game pulls off. But then, they did it. They fucking did it. As Abby puts an unconscious Lev in a boat, and Ellie puts her bag of weapons down in another, I thought it was over. I thought when Ellie saw how ravaged Abby was, how much she had suffered, that little girl we'd seen grown up from kind, naive teenager to strong woman would have the same realization the players had hours ago. That all this violence, all the murder is meaningless and that vengeance never solves anything. But no, she fucking picks up her knife and demands an unfair fight from an emaciated dying person or she will kill an innocent person there and then... And this is the kicker. This is the fucking kicker. You control Ellie and you need to eviscerate Abby yourself to proceed. Now, I get why they thought this might be a good idea. To pit your original lovable protagonist, who has been consumed by rage in a knife fight with her original and mostly helpless target in a final epic fistfight showdown. Might sound like a powerfully iconic video game moment on paper, but I tell you what the result was. Dying. Because I put the controller down at every single phase during the fight, and I hoped, Lord, I pray to God, that maybe this would end. As a player, I had the context and personal relationship with Abby to know that this was dumb, and I didn't want to see this happen. I was hours ahead in my personal player arc than Ellie was at this moment, and I felt this huge disconnect that really dispelled the charm the game had on me. I talked earlier about unique moments that can only happen in a video game. Well, here we go. This kind of frustration can only happen in a video game. If this were a movie and I had to see this happen, it wouldn't be nearly as bad. I could understand that the movie had flipped the roles, and I could root for Abby as the underdog, and that drama would work. But in a video game where you're controlling the bad guy, and you're forced into doing something you no longer want to do, that you learned over the course of the game not to want, it feels so frustrating and so counterproductive. I don't think good video game storytelling necessitates choice, but in this case, where you're forced into something this deeply unsatisfying, I think that choice would have been a huge improvement. The fight plays out in however many phases. At this point, I was pretty checked out. And in the final phase, Abby bites Ellie's ring and pinky finger. Ellie then turns the tide of the fight and gets the upper hand. She goes to strike the killing blow when she has a flashback of Joel, and she can't finish it. She collapses into a sobbing heap and tells Abby to leave. As her boat fades into the fog, Ellie holds her bleeding hand as she cries. Cut back to the farmhouse, but the warm glow of the setting sun is replaced with dark clouds, and the house that seems so inviting is cold and empty. It is. Dina is left, taking everything of meaning except Ellie's art and her guitar, a guitar given to her by Joel. Now, I've waited till this moment to really talk about the guitar because I think it's an important prop, maybe the prop with the strongest imbued meaning in any video game ever. Very early on, Joel fixes up and gives Ellie a beautiful Taylor guitar, which he teaches her how to play. When he gives it to her, he plays this song.
If I ever were to lose you, I'd surely lose myself. Everything I have found here, I'm not found by myself.
The song will be played again in part by Ellie in a quiet moment later, and a few other times you can pick up a guitar and control what Ellie plays, like this hauntingly beautiful cover of Take On Me.
Talking away. I don't know what I'm to say. I'll say it anyway. Today's enough.
Music is brought up often in this game. In fact, during a flashback with Joel, there's a side quest to get some strings from a music store. However, they never make it there together, maybe some kind of thematic foreshadowing. Anyways, the point I'm trying to make is that the music is important to the story in this game, and the guitar is a totem of Joel and Ellie's relationship. So when you return to the farmhouse and the guitar is there, that's a moment when Ellie needs to reconcile all the evil she has committed during the game with the love, safety, and warmth that she grew up with in Joel. As the controls for the guitar come up one last time, Ellie fails to play the tune as she's lost her digits in the meaningless fight with Abby. This may be the most heartbreaking moment in the game. And before you can really process it, the game flashes back to the night of the dance, after Ellie and Dina's first kiss, where, for the last time, Ellie finds Joel on his porch to talk to him. In this end scene, we sadly find out that Ellie hasn't forgiven Joel for saving her that fateful day at the end of the first game, but wants to try. In the final moments of the game, after all the violence, after all the misery, after all the turning towards darkness, after all the difficult choices, we find out that Abby has robbed Ellie of the chance to properly reconcile with Joel. It's so bittersweet, in the absolute best of ways. She may have begun the journey to forgiveness, but will never be able to share it with Joel. The flashback ends, just the wind blowing through the grass. Ellie puts the guitar down, leaves the house, and walks away from where we once saw the sun set. Credits roll, and just like the last game, I was left with these deep and difficult unanswerable questions. Where did Ellie go? Will she find Dina? Has she found any kind of peace? Or has the violence consumed her and doomed her to be the last of her us? These are the questions that have kept me up at night, the ones that make me replay the game over and over in my head. I wrote the script from memory before even replaying the game because it was all so vivid in my soul. I'm not sure how I feel, but of this I'm certain. After the innumerable conversations I forced my coworkers into, and after theorizing for hours with my girlfriend about this game, by the way, this is the first game my girlfriend made me wait for her to get home to play, I still don't know how to rate this game. Maybe a number can't quite capture the grayish subtlety between the highs and lows I just experienced. I can really appreciate the risk Naughty Dog took in making this story. It would have been much easier to give fans a good game with a good survival quest for Joel and Ellie, but the dark path this game takes will stick with me for years. I love the duality in the structure of this story. How we see things one way, and through the experience of our foe, we understand the consequences of this hatred so much more, and we feel it. Mostly. When I played this game, I didn't cry, so count that against the game, but I've seen dozens of tweets like, I cried 7 times during the game, so I don't know. What impresses me, even more than the interesting structure, is the way that it uses the little things to tell the stories. Those side conversations are the best writing in the game. This story is beyond dense, and even though I went deep into the story in this video, there's so much more to it. I also don't know if this game is too dark or not. It felt like there was a pretty good balance between the violence and the tenderness, and I never felt so much despair that I didn't want to continue. This game is about seeking light in the dark, and maybe players have lost their way. But I don't blame them. Just as Ellie is represented with a moth tattoo, maybe it's symbolic that when she loses the light, she loses her direction. And as the players fail to see the light in the game, maybe they lose their motivation to play. Interestingly, Abby's a firefly, which, as in its literal form, has a light within them, so interpret that as you will. I've seen lots of people criticize the game for withholding the context that Ellie and Joel were on the road to reconciliation from the audience as a cheap twist, save for a mic drop moment at the end of the game. But I don't feel that way. I feel like in the universe of the game, even without that knowledge framing her choices, her revenge path makes sense in the first part of the game. Beyond this, processing trauma and grief isn't done in a linear fashion. It's more complex as the brain makes connection between the different facets of grief and the happy memories you may have of that person. As someone who lost my dad fairly recently, I can tell you that processing grief in real life makes no linear sense. But in storytelling, maybe it should. If your main criticism comes down to, this game shoves SJW bullshit down my throat, you're wrong. Sure, this game does have LGBTQ+ characters, but the theme of the game isn't even their queerness. And their sexuality and gender are certainly not shoved in your face. If simply including them in the game upsets you, I invite you to stop this video, do some reading to broaden your perspective, and take the time to deeply meditate on why you feel this way. To have such a closed-minded opinion about the inclusion of LGBTQ+ characters in a game says a lot more about you than it does about The Last of Us Part 2. That being said, it's interesting to me that the game has also gotten flack from the queer community for prominently including gay characters while not theming more of the game as queer content or having an authentically queer voice. As a straight cis-white male, I really don't think I'm equipped with the right voice to address these concerns. So, if you're interested in that topic, I'll link some of my favorite articles on the matter, and I encourage you to seek out even more. A lot of people, myself included in this video, have criticized the decision to forego any player choice. This is a hard one for me to grapple with. As much as I love Deus Ex, The Witcher 3, or Detroit Become Human, I don't think every single game needs to have a branching narrative to be an interesting story. Games like Bioshock, or Nier Automata, or Spec Ops: The Line all force the players to perform actions that, when the wider reality of those actions' consequences are revealed, it recontextualizes everything the player has done without giving them the option of choosing something else. I think the best moments in this game are something new and exciting. It's why some critics call this game's story bold. The emotional impact this game will have on you depends mostly on your attachment to a single character, Abby, who you first hate, then may or may not learn to love. This is a strength and a flaw. For me, the biggest sin that The Last of Us Part 2 commits is that by the end of the story, the audience is way ahead of the characters. The writers failed to understand what the audience would be feeling for certain parts of the game and made narrative choices that didn't really work. Now, some kind of distance between the audience and what the characters are doing is fine. Michael Corleone, in the Godfather series, once an American war hero, goes down a tragic dark path of letting his power and hatred consume him. The idea of characters doing something the audience doesn't like doesn't mean those actions are inherently bad storytelling. But when a meaningful part of the game, where the player and the character they are controlling are in frustrating disagreement, It weighs on the impact the story can have. However, for me, these deep frustrations have highlighted one thing, that otherwise I was so deeply engaged in the excellent narrative experience that Naughty Dog has created. My problems with the story only appear so huge because of the magnificent skill and craft on display. The reason people are so divided on this story is not because it sucks or it failed. In my opinion, this rift in the gaming community is a demonstration of the heights Naughty Dog was reaching for. The greatest art is polarizing and challenging. It's the work you can't get out of your head, not necessarily the one you liked at first glance. The fact that there's been such a vocal outpouring of hate speaks volumes to me. Although flawed in some ways, the near-perfect technical presentation, the satisfying gameplay, and the risky direction Naughty Dog took on the story combined to make this an unmatched game filled with highs and lows that I will be wrestling with for years. So that's it. Thank you so much for watching, really, thank you. This is obviously my first video of this kind, and making another one will depend on how all you folk react, so it took a lot of work, a lot of facing unpleasant opinions, so if you enjoyed this review, like and share it, please. And please subscribe. If you want to hear more from me, you can check out Carpool Critics for some of my movie opinions.